अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, सिंध टेलीविजन न्यूज़ जे पारां मां आहियां मुंहिंजो मेज़बान फयाज़ नाच। असां हिन वक़्तु मौजूदु आहियूं अमरीकी जेका आहे दारुल हुकूमत वॉशिंगटन DC जे अंदरि वॉइस ऑफ अमेरिका जे अंदरि असां मौजूदु आहियूं। वॉइस ऑफ अमेरिका जी डायरेक्टर अमंडा बेनेट जेका आहे उहा असां सां गॾु आहे। अमंडा जेका आहे उहा तमामु सीनियर सहाफ़ी आहे। डायरेक्टर थियण खां पहिरियों वॉशिंगटन पोस्ट जे लाइ हू कॉलमिस्ट रही आहे। उनखां पहिरियों मैनेजिंग एडिटर रही आहे फिलेडेल्फिया इंक्वायर जी, ऐं ब्लूमबर्ग में हुननि कमु कयो आहे। ऐं सभ खां वॾी ॻाल्हि इहा आहे त जेको सहाफ़ियुनि जे हवाले सां तमामु वॾो अवॉर्ड थिए थो पुलिट्ज़र, उन्ही जी जेका उहा विनर आहे। अचो त हुन सां गुफ़्तगू। Amanda, thank you very much for giving us time for this conversation. You are a very senior journalist and you have worked with so many organizations, Washington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, Bloomberg. And why you have chosen this to be work with the state-owned organization?
So, can you think of a more exciting and necessary job right now than to be the world's trusted and objective source of news and information? When you think about the way the press is becoming less and less free around the world and more polarized all over the world, even in places where there's free press, I think the need for Voice of America to tell America's story is much greater than ever.
But you know, there is countries like ours or outside America, there is a perception that VOA is a propaganda tool.
I don't know why anyone would need propaganda from the United States when telling our legitimate story is so compelling. When you think about the story that we have of a nation of immigrants and the way that we're working out our issues, you don't need propaganda. The very fact that we are able to tell the story from both sides, that we are able to criticize, that we're able to show the good side and the bad side of American policy, the way the charter, the VOA charter, which tells us what to do, tells us that we must do that. Why would you need propaganda? That story itself is way more compelling.
But you know, America is a great country. It has a presence in different parts of the world, and their people have different kind of perceptions and they have different kind of viewpoints about American foreign policy, but VOA has to toe the line of the government. Don't you think as a journalist you feel more uncomfortable with those things, that end of the day you have to toe the line of the government?
It's a delicate balance for every Western organization, as you can see, working around the globe. You want to, as much as you possibly can, be respectful of the laws and practices and customs of the countries in which you work. We also, however, need to be faithful to our charter to tell stories truly and objectively. It's a delicate balance, but it's one that we are very intent on doing.
What is the scope of the VOA? In how many languages you are focusing, and what kind of programs are being telecasted for?
So anybody who comes to the VOA building, anybody who comes to the Voice of America building, as I did the first time, is bound to be impressed and awed and a little bit humbled by the scope of our mission. Inside this very building, one building, there are 45 separate newsrooms. 45 separate newsrooms, some large, some with hundreds of people, some as small as 2 or 3 people. And each one is reporting and telling and talking about and discussing the news of information in their own languages. And you know, just as you know, we do both the Pashto and Urdu languages to reach Pakistan. We are able to communicate with populations all around the world and America's diaspora populations in languages that they understand and can relate to.
Why still we have been listening about it from the Pakistan point of view, there will be a VOA Sindhi service, but still we are waiting to hear anything.
I don't know anything about that, so.
Okay. So you talked about.
I've only been here 8 weeks, guys. So give me a break.
Okay. You were talking that there are 45 newsrooms. Some have a huge staff, some are smaller. How you identify that this newsroom should have a large space and large staff, and this newsroom should have on a small basis?
we do the best we can to match our staffing with the job that there is to be done, and the size of the audience, the frequency of our programming. In some places we offer, an hour or so a day. In some places we have a full service news operation. So we try and match the staff to that, and to change the staff as the needs change.
In Pakistan, VOA has a huge presence, and there is a wonderful newsroom. I have been there in 2012 election. But in Pakistan, there is a lot of criticism, a lot of difference of opinion in the society for the American policies, for the American governments. Do you give space to those sentiments and those viewpoints in your programs?
That's one of the things that's really important for us to do, is engage authentically with the audiences and either the things they like about American foreign policy or don't like about American foreign policy. We are mandated by our charter to present responsible news and discussion and opinion about American foreign policy. So as long as the discussion and the criticism of American foreign policy is responsible and is fact-based, we will be happy to discuss and bring people on for looking at both sides of any issue.
So how do you deal with the issues in your society? Like there is a presidential elections, how do you report those coverage? You report it for the Republicans or the Democrats if they are in the government. So how do you report these activities, presidential races and those elections?
So as you can see readily around you on every news medium, this is an exceptionally polarized election this year. I don't think any of us have ever seen an American political climate as polarized as this. And it's one of the reasons why we inside VOA have been really trying to be as vigilant as possible to make our coverage respected and fair, and that we're trying to present both sides of the issue. We're trying to present issues from both sides. This has been one of my personal most extreme efforts, is to make sure that we don't allow any political biases to creep into our coverage, and if we see them creeping in, to remove them. We need to be as objective and trusted in covering our own politics as we are about covering other people's.
You know, as you mentioned, that these elections are very polarized, and there is an extreme level taken by the Donald Trump, and extreme level taken, and in economic terms, extreme level taken by the Bernie Sanders. So how you manage to report all those things? Because Trump's statements were very, against Muslims, against Mexican, and so.
It is very important that even as we put out our news reports, that we are careful to be objective and really fair. But that doesn't mean not calling out statements if they're not true, not reporting on the way people respond to statements. When you have a candidate making statements such as building a wall or banning Muslims, you want to present the opposite side to say, here's what this would mean, here's what the people say, here's how this relates to our past U.S. policies. You can let people know about the way the policies are playing out in the United States without being not biased. You can still do it being objective, you just work in a factual way.
So, but you think that it is difficult, especially in this election, for an organization like VOA, which is government-funded organization and government-representative organization, that has to report on this kind of candidates?
I think that you can easily see that this has probably been the most difficult election to cover, not just for Voice of America, but for all news media, all American news media in particular. And one of the things about such a polarized climate is that no matter how hard you try to be objective, people are going to find bias in your coverage. They're going to charge you with bias if you try and cover the other side fairly. It's a very difficult thing. What's more, for news organizations like ours that really make a serious attempt to be fact-based, this election is posing particular challenges to make sure that we look and report not only statements but also the objective facts behind those statements.
But you know, for the private organizations, Trump is making headlines. That's very easy for them to make headlines with the Trump statements. But for an organization like you, which is government, do you also work like that?
Well, we want people to watch our broadcasts, to listen to our broadcasts, to read our webcasts, to look at things on social media. We don't want to be boring and not read, but neither is it our job to go after flashy headlines. That's not our job. That's not part of our mission. We don't need to do that. And so we are trying to analyze what's going on from the point of view particularly of our diaspora communities, because that's one of our biggest missions, is to cover our diaspora communities and make sure we understand how they're reacting to various political messages. So we don't have the same issue of trying to, do any kind of strange headlines to catch attention.
How do you outreach here in diaspora and USA? Because there are a lot of people from China, from India, from Pakistan, from Africa, from every part of the world. So
I think the coverage of the American diaspora is probably one of the most important things for Voice of America, not only right now, but perhaps even more so going forward. The American diaspora community is incredibly influential in the United States and also in terms of the connection back to their home countries. These communities are in constant touch by cell phone, by letter, by Skype, by traveling back and forth. If you want to really speak to a country, speaking to the American diaspora is one of the really most important ways of doing so. And so we're going to be in the coming years focusing more and more on using our critical advantage. And our critical advantage is we have people from those countries who can speak to people in languages they understand, which means that I think that we can develop a really, really unique in American media, authentic coverage of an American diaspora.
how do you decide that we should focus on the number of diaspora people here, or U.S. interventions or U.S. presence on different countries? How do you decide? Whether you decide with the number of the diaspora people that we should open a VOA service in Urdu or VOA service in Hindi or Pashto, or you always decide on the U.S. presence and U.S. interest?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that question, so can we pass on that one? I'm not quite.
So, you have been a senior journalist. How do you see the U.S. society nowadays, especially when you say this is a polarized election?
Well, politically and out in public, this is clearly one of the most polarized discussions that I've ever seen. As a matter of fact, it is the most polarized discussion I've ever seen. Behind that, however, I think you will find that American society in general remains extremely optimistic overall in terms of the future of this country, of their own points of view. I think that you'll find that in terms of things like education and health and medicine and the ways people live, the way they raise their children, I think that you'll find that there is much substantive and optimistic discussion, planning, and policy going on that gets kind of obscured by the political, not biases, but the political polarization. There's clearly work that needs to be done in this country in terms of income inequality. All the candidates on all sides of the issue really understand that that's the case. But overall, I think that we're finding that the American public still remains very committed to this country, very committed to democracy, very committed to the ideas of equality and inclusion, and very optimistic.
But you don't think that Bernie Sanders has exposed all the American weaknesses of the American economic system, that and the American social service sector, that American government is not providing good opportunities for their youth to provide them education, and it is not providing the people of America a good health care, and it is not providing America a good social security. So
the shortcomings and flaws of these issues, I mean, it didn't take Bernie Sanders to expose them. They've been there all along. I mean, the words war on poverty go back 40 years. We've been working on trying to alleviate these issues for years and years and years. Huge portions of the U.S. budget and thought and spending goes into trying to deal with providing health care to everyone. There was just a massive legislation that was passed within the last several years trying to address the idea that health care needs to be something available to everyone. There's huge educational policies, educational reform on the part of the government, on the part of the private sector, on the part of charities. No one has been ignoring those issues. It wasn't something that Bernie Sanders discovered.
but you know, the continuously the Wall Street movement and the Bernie Sanders phenomena, and before that Seattle movement, and now the terms like 1% versus 99%. Don't you think that these kind of things are polarizing the American people with common people versus against the supremacy of the capitalist system?
I think that the issue of the 1% versus the 99%, again, that was not a phenomenon of this election. You can remember it back several elections past. This has been something that has been concerning the American people for a very long time. And, oh, sorry. This is something that's been concerning the American public for a very long time. And what's happened is, just in the recent past, it's easy to forget, we had a global, major financial crisis, a major shock to the system. And I think that more than anything else exposed the real gulf between the very poor and the very rich. I think it's the financial crisis which really shocked us into realizing what's going on.
And you know, as we were talking about and you also mentioned it, that there is a polarization. On the cultural side, there is also polarization, as the Trump is talking, and he has a large support of the common Republican Party voters. What do you think that kind of cultural polarization, how it affects the U.S. society, especially when we talk about in context of the diaspora?
Well, when you think about the diaspora population, you have to think about one thing that's really very fundamental that perhaps is easy to forget. The diaspora population is living here. They deliberately came to this country. They saw something attractive and appealing about being and living in this country. They saw educational opportunity, they saw financial opportunity, they saw opportunities to make a life for themselves and the children. The issues in the Trump campaign have to do with how many people you're going to let into this country, not how many people are going to flee out of this country. Despite everything you see, people still want to come here. They want to come here to study. They want to come here to start businesses. They want to engage with American entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, the American entrepreneurial spirit is, you know, one of the greatest in the world, and it's very attractive to people from outside the United States. There's still a lot of stuff that's really good that caused people to want to come here.
You were talking about the optimism of the American people. How do you think there is a large quantity of the diasporas from Africa, from South Asia, from Middle East, from every part of the world? Do you think they feel comfortable here? What do you think? How are their response to all this situation?
I think one of the responsibilities of the Voice of America is to connect with our diaspora communities and to connect our diaspora communities with their countries back home. And I think one of our responsibilities is to cover the full experience of the American diaspora, the issues that they have, the discrimination they possibly face, but also the reasons they came here and the things that appeal to them and the things that they want to continue having, such as engaging in entrepreneurialism, getting an education, taking advantage of American healthcare system. These are all things I think that are attractive and appealing, that are part of the things we should cover. It doesn't mean that's the only thing we should cover. We should do as the Voice of America charter says and look at all sides of the issue, be fair, be objective, and cover all parts of American society and not just one part. To me, that's a mandate for covering all of America, including all of America's diaspora.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for giving us time. नाज़रीन गुफ्तगू तां ॿुधी अमेंडा बेनेट जेका आहे वॉइस ऑफ अमेरिका जी डायरेक्टर आहे ऐं जीअं तव्हांखे मूं प्रोग्राम जी शुरूआत में ॿुधायो त वॉशिंगटन पोस्ट ऐं उनखां पोइ जेको आहे मुख़्तलिफ़ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन्स में हुननि कमु कयो आहे ऐं हिन वक़्तु अमेरिका जी जेका गवर्नमेंट जी जेका सर्विस आहे वॉइस ऑफ अमेरिका उन्हनि जी जेका उहा डायरेक्टर आहे गुफ्तगू थी प्रोग्राम जो वक़्तु पूरो थिए थो पंहिंजे मेज़बान फयाज़ नाश खे इजाज़त सदाईं गॾु